I know about the FARC.
The FARC rebels, sure.
Right, sure. Yeah.
So,
because they took over the cocaine business, and we had a beef with them in Europe.
Could you go into that?
Yeah. Do you want to do it right now? Or
yes, please.
Well, one of the guys in Holland made a deal with FARC, got up. See, what makes it so easy is getting involved in illicit businesses as a Hell's Angel or probably any other motorcycle club is you can get instant credit.
Right.
Because you have to pay your bills. That's a rule,
Yeah.
So, Mike Wallace, when I was on 60 Minutes, Mike Wallace hammered that home with me. It was right in our bylaws, no drug burns. And,
meaning you don't rip people off for drugs.
Never rip people off. And
hang on.
Okay, I know. You think you got me now, don't you?
I don't think anything. I think
okay, I'm teasing her.
I think if it's in your bylaws that you don't burn people over drugs.
Yeah. And Mike Wallace asked me the same thing.
But that implies that you sanction drug dealing.
Well, it does imply that, but
how is it not a criminal organization?
Well, you'd think that they would have taken that and used it against us, but I'm going to say to you, like I said to Mr. Wallace, 30 years ago, whenever it was.
That's so cool, by the way.
Yeah, it was cool,
yeah.
And I'm going to tell you a little story about him afterwards. We didn't know where they found that piece of paper. The feds mysteriously wound up with it. Was it an authentic piece of paper? Sure it was, but I sure the hell didn't admit it on camera, but it was part of the rules, but it was really about anything. You couldn't even sell, and what the guys were doing is they were going to Haight-Ashbury and they were selling joints for $1 a piece with oregano.
Okay, ripping people off.
And the guy said, we made a rule. You can't do that.
Right.
Because the hippies were getting mad at us. And, we were friends with the Grateful Dead. And Big Brother, Chocolate George, I think, was romancing Janis Joplin at the time.
Right.
And, people...
So it hurts the brand.
Yeah, it hurts the brand. But getting back to the FARC, this member got $1 million worth of drugs. And
fronted.
And the money disappeared, the drugs disappeared.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if it's true, it's kind of an urban myth within the club, but the FARC said either you kill him or we'll kill him. And we didn't want a war with the FARC, and the guy wound up dead,
Wow.
If in fact, is that true? Like I said, it's kind of part of the myth and the legend of the Hells Angels. There was a really strong leader in the club prior to that incident happening. And I think if he would have remained as leader of the club, that never would have happened. But he got pushed out,
Right.
And sometimes it's better to let the people, maybe that you don't like their personalities, but if they have a strong hand on the membership, sometimes it's better to let them keep control of the club because they can do things that law enforcement can't. And that was a mistake I think they made in Ventura.
Can you explain that?
Well,
doing things that law enforcement can't?
Well,
you mean stopping?
We control the streets.
So stopping criminality before it starts.
Who else could? Okay, here's a perfect example. There's drive-by shootings starting to happen. This is a new phenomenon in Southern California.
Right.
Okay?
It's like the 80s.
Yeah, it starts happening in Ventura. What do the Hells Angels do? We call a meeting with all the street gangs. They come down to the clubhouse and we tell them, you guys don't have to get along. But if you guys start shooting and continue to shoot each other, there had been 2 drive-by shootings, nobody got hit. He said, we're going to intercede and we're going to make sure there's no drive-by shootings in Ventura County. Well, could the police do that? No. I mean, they couldn't do that, but the Hells Angels did it. And there was a lot of people in law enforcement that embraced it. And there was a lot of people in law enforcement that it disturbed them because they didn't have the power or authority to do what the Hells Angels could do.
Wow.
Now, a lot of the old-time cops were, what do you guys care? Let them get the job done.
Yeah.
Like, make the community safe. And that was the end goal, to make the community safe. But what happens is like in a lot of things in life, the egos
Totally.
and the personalities get in the way.
Right.
And there was a police chief. I'm not going to mention his name. There was a police chief in there that he told me personally. He goes, "You guys behave yourselves, do whatever the you want in the underworld. Don't impact the community. Leave the citizens alone." And
Wow.
that's a pretty good formula.
Did you make the drive-by shooting stop?
Yeah, we
after
did.
that?
Oh yeah, they completely stopped. And it evolved from there. And one of the same cops that took exception to us being involved in stopping the drive-by shootings. What happened from there is we started communicating with these street gangs. And
Who are the
they
Bloods
were
and the Crips?
they were Pierpont was a gang, Avenue Gangsters was a gang, Midtown was a gang.
Okay.
They had these little gangs. The Colonial Chicas in Oxnard, was a gang, and we started having these parties at the clubhouse, and we would charge entrance fee, and then we'd sell support gear. We'd sell shots of liquor. We'd sell, beer, and we'd always have these local bands. Like, you ever heard of Big Bad Voodoo Daddy? They were kind of a big band for a while. They played at the clubhouse several times, but we started making like $20,000-$25,000 a night. It was like a nightclub. The clubhouse became almost like a nightclub, and the same cops that were mad about the drive-by shootings were mad that we were making so much money.
Right.
They didn't think it was cool,
Yeah.
One of them, I got an argument with him. He goes, "What are we getting out of it? We're getting nothing." And I said, "Well, look," I said, "you can get all these street gangs together and there's not even one fist fight." I said, "Don't you think that accomplishes something?" I go, "These guys get to understand, hey, maybe these guys aren't much different than us, and they can strike up relationships," but they didn't see it that way.
So do you feel like the heat and the pressure from these ego-driven bureaucrats in the sheriff's department, the district attorney's office, you think that kept getting more persistent as the years went on?
Well, I think if you talk to the old timers in law enforcement, it's almost like talking to the old timers in the Hells Angels.
Yeah.
You got these new young whippersnappers, and they're losing the essence of what law enforcement is about. But I think all those jobs are ego driven, pretty much.
Did they make any what they would call righteous busts while you were president, from the 70s up to the 2000s?
Not in Ventura. Look, let me tell you, we moved out of Los Angeles because of what you spoke about earlier, the bombings, the machine gunnings. I came up with this idea as a Marine. It's like there was one bridge still that we could exit the town and get to a safe place and regroup and go on with our lives. And that town was Ventura. And I had went to the club and I said, "Look, it's only a matter of time till we get indicted." These guys were honest. I mean, they were taking pictures. They were stopping us, FI cards, questioning people. And I came up with this idea for the Saint and Slaves to become the San Fernando Valley Hells Angels. The Los Angeles Hells Angels would pack up, and I'm being kind of dramatic now, in the middle of the night, and retreat to Ventura, open the Ventura Hells Angels up. The investigation would shift to the Saint and Slaves, who were now Hells Angels, who had nothing to do with the war with the Mongols. Until that point. So they were investigating the wrong guys.
Right.
And we were all up in Ventura drinking pina coladas, living it up.
Yeah.
And they're investigating the Saint and Slaves, who are now Hells Angels.
Right.
Well, they don't know the difference between the Hells Angels, Saint and Slaves. Yeah. And, law enforcement didn't interact with each other. They hoarded the information.
Are you able to make those decisions unilaterally?
Well, I had to get permission, but
From who?
Well, from the body of Hell's Angel presidents at the time. I went to a meeting in 1978, but I also...
Is that how it works?
Yeah.
If you want to open a chapter in a new town, you have to
get permission. But
from
I pretty much
higher-ups.
did it.
Okay.
I kind of did things that I felt were right and I believed in, and I was ready to fight for them. But we're up in Ventura now. The investigation stalls and nothing happens for a decade later till Brett Eaton, who was one of the people in the car that killed Jingles and Redbeard, the Mongols. Remember the funeral?
Right.
There was an explosion.
Right.
And Brett's, they made the bomb for the frame up. Him and that guy carried it in. Brett Eaton's in New York now hiding because there's so much heat in Southern California. He gets busted for drugs, and he tells them, how would you guys like to solve some murders in Southern California?
Right.
They jump right on it, and that's how they caught up to the people that had perpetrated those crimes.
And did you try to dissuade members from selling drugs because of that reason?
I didn't get involved. I figured they could do what they want, but this is what I would do. I would approach them, and I'd say, look, if I know what you're doing, the police know what you're doing, because the police do this every day for a living, and they know what's going on. You may fool yourself and think you're smarter than them and you're better than them and you're slicker than them, but maybe you are, but only for a short envelope of time, because they'll figure out what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that would be my speech. And if they wanted to continue to sell narcotics, that was their business. I didn't want to get involved because I didn't want to get busted.
But you knew just from the
Sure, I could figure it out.
Decentralized nature of, you knew that if you weren't involved, even if they raided the clubhouse and arrested these guys, if you don't know anything, they can't get you.
You can't get me. But look, you got a guy that's not working. He's up for 4 or 5 days straight, and then he sleeps 3 or 4 days. He's riding a new motorcycle. He just got a brand new car. He's living down at Pierpont Beach in an expensive apartment. I mean, when I say expensive, back then, an apartment down at the beach is probably $1,200, which was, a lot of money, But it's pretty easy to figure out what they're doing. I mean, I don't want to say to them, I don't want to have knowledge of them. I don't want to get in a conversation, well, how much are you selling, or I don't want it to appear that I have any interest in it.
Right. Okay. So, yeah.
But it's pretty easy to figure out. And if I can figure it out, cops are right behind me, or maybe they're ahead of me.
But they haven't been able, you're right, though, they have not been able to make federal cases the way that they make RICO cases on the mob, even when the underlings do dirt and they get the Godfather and they tie that in together. They haven't been able to really do that.
No, they haven't, and they probably never will. But, sometimes some of the guys do cavalier stuff, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what I wanted to say was, when all the bombs are going off in Southern California, who do I get a call from? Sam Serentino. This is after I became vice president of the Hells Angels down there. You know who Sam Serentino was? He was the underboss of the LA mob.
Wow.
And he said, really, George? At a funeral?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were really upset not because they had a high moral value. I don't believe for 1 minute Sam Serentino gave a shit that we were blowing those guys up at a funeral, but he thought it was interfering in the cash flow
with business.
With those guys.
Yeah,
they did not like it.
Brings the heat.
It does bring the heat, and that was what he said to me. Really, George, at a funeral? And later, this was in the late 70s. Later, I'm in prison with him in 1986 at Terminal Island. And, we carry the conversation on there.
Yeah.
And he's there. Carlos Marcello, are you familiar with him? No. He ran New Orleans, man. You ought to check him out. Carlos Marcello.
He wasn't the guy that had something to do with
the Kennedy assassination.
Was that him?
Yeah.
That was Joe Pesci's character in JFK?
No, Joe Pesci played...
he was the gay guy, the flamboyant.
Yeah, I can't think of his name. No, Carlos Marcello was the crime boss in New Orleans. And I mean, he ruled that town with an iron fist. But Sam Serentino, Carlos Marcello, and 2 or 3 other mob upper echelon guys got caught bribing a judge. And they all went to jail. Yeah. And that's where they got Marcellus talking about killing Kennedy. And but the family feud, right, between the Kennedys and the Marcellus. Bobby Kennedy deported them
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and then he snuck back in the country, and it started a real rift between them.
So when you're sitting in prison at Terminal Island,
that's where I met all the mob guys that I know,
Yeah.
that I have relationships with.
did you feel like you were a criminal? Do you consider yourself a criminal? Or did you back then?
Well, I consider myself an outlaw. I mean, you have your description of a outlaw is a criminal. You know, I have a different description. I'm more like I feel like Billy the Kid or Wild Bill Hickok or something to that effect. You know, I think you see me more as a John Dillinger type or something. I see John Dillinger as a criminal. You know?
I think I guess somebody that commits crime for a living. Back then, I know you're retired, you're out of the game, you're out of the life for the most part, the culture. But back in the day, your run, when you were around real bosses, like criminal bosses, did you feel like you were one of them, or did you say, "Oh, I'm persecuted. I'm the head of an organization that's not a criminal organization"?
I felt that I had a smart ass mouth. And I dished it out. And my mom always used to say, if you're going to dish it out, you better be ready to take it, son. And that's kind of the way my mom and dad were. There was no ratting, there was no whining. And of course, my wife says I whine now because my bones hurt. But I'm being a smart ass. But no, I didn't complain. I take my medicine. And I'll tell you something else. I've never went to prison for anything I've ever done. I went to prison for what people perceived or said I did with them. The informants put me in prison. They've never busted me for anything I've ever done. And I'm not ready to make a confessional. I want you to know that.
I'll ask you broadly, have you done criminal acts that you have not been prosecuted for that could have put you in prison?
Well, I think that you're in a war that lasts for 30 years.
With the
probably
Mongols.
Some point in time, when the Mongols, the Outlaws, the Bandidos in Europe,
and what would some theoretically, are we talking about like
possession of an illegal gun, possession of explosives? There was a garage, we used to call it the Armory in Los Angeles, and it had 2,000 pounds of dynamite. It had, we had a British anti-tank gun, which I always used to laugh because I used to ask the president, "Oh man, John," I go, "The Mongols don't even have a tank, John."
Just in case they get a tank.
But we had an anti-tank gun there just in case. We had lathes. We were making silencers. I got pretty good at making silencers. There was guns down there, people filing numbers off guns. There was,
Was that used like communally between the chapters in Southern California? Like if you needed to get strapped?
Well, we kind of had our own, each charter kind of had their own deal.
Okay.
We're pretty, it's interesting you say that because it's like, I don't want anybody to know outside of my small circle of people what I had going or what was really going on, and, Ray Glore got busted. He was the leader in Los Angeles. Poor leadership on that with this guy. So he gets busted. That's a whole, I don't know if you know the dynamics of everything that went on in Los Angeles. The Orange County Police put an informant in the middle of Los Angeles, and people are being bombed, people are being machine gunned, and the Orange County Police won't share it with the LAPD because they have their own investigation going. They're trying to stop the Hells Angels from moving into Orange County and creating a drug network down there. So they target this guy, Ray Glore, the president of Los Angeles. Ray gets busted. So he tells two guys, go to the Armory and clean it out. Get all the dynamite out of there. Get all the weapons out of there, the machine guns out of there. The guys go over to move the explosives and whatnot. And the one guy gets out of the car, walks up to the door, sticks a key in, and all hell breaks loose. As soon as he sticks the key in the door, apparently Ray had flipped.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And
right.
you know, of course,
the
later
cops busted the armament.
Yeah. But we got a young lawyer, and he tells the district attorney, goes, well, what was in that garage when they got there? There was nothing in the garage because they cleaned it out for public safety. So he was walking into an empty garage.
Oh.
So, you know.
Yeah, but you exposed the rat.
Yeah, and he died later that night. Somebody walked up to his front door, knocked on his door, he answered the door, and they shot him a bunch of times. Wow. And he died. That's still an unsolved murder, you know.
So do you think, because now I kind of see J. Dobbins' point, why the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
I'm losing you then, huh?
No, you're not. Well, you had me. Yeah, you're losing me a little bit. Now I'm like, okay, well, I have no opinion one way or the other. I'm just saying I can now see why the Hells Angels, as the decades go on, and you guys are strapped like this, you have the feds now. The feds
are interested.
Yeah, normally now it's
public safety, man.
It's not local pigs that really investigate you guys anymore. It's federal. Yeah. It's the ATF. It's the FBI.
I'm laughing because I haven't heard that term "pigs" in years.
It's funny, right? It's Vietnam.
Yeah,
it's a Vietnam era. It's a throwback. Yeah. So, you know, that brings down heat, and now you have.
See, let me. Can I interject something here?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, this is what I see. Criminal. Outlaw. Got a garage full of weapons to defend ourselves because I'm a outlaw. Now, if I want to become a criminal, maybe I go over to the other garage that's 5 blocks away from the armory that's full of crank, and go in there and go, hey man, I'm gonna jump in the game. Let me get a pound from you. Now, that's what I see as a criminal, and maybe I'm a hypocrite, but that's how I see it.
The guy got shot to death later that night. That would be a criminal act.
Well, I don't know. He broke the code. I see. See, I'm a real outlaw at heart, man. Wow. You know, I really mean that. You know, was Billy the Kid? Was he in it?
Yeah.
Who was in charge of that town? That town, they were fighting for control of that town.
Right.
In Lincoln, right? Do you know much about the Lincoln County Wars? No.
Kansas.
No, New Mexico.
Oh, wow. There's a lot of Lincolns.
Yeah. Well.
No, I don't know about
I'd rather have Benjamins than Lincolns.
Yeah,
but,
same.
You know,
rather Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't know much about that stuff. You know, I'm an old man.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but that's the mentality.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. It's a little well, one would argue, and
I'm 80 years old, man. You're going to say archaic.
I was going to say archaic.
I know what you were going to say, because you know why? Because now I'm like some of the informants that testified against me. I'm reading your mind. You know, I had an informant say that. You know, He said, "Did Mr. Christie order you to do that?" No, he didn't, but I knew what he was thinking.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, what is Mr. Christie thinking right now?"
So you're almost like you purport to be almost a vigilante organization when you say we can't enter a safe.
I don't know about a vigilante,
but that's essentially.
I'd rather be called an outlaw than a vigilante.
Right, but that's what you do when you say we keep the
streets. Of course, I did. Charles
safe.
Bronson, I did like him in what the hell was it? Death Wish?
Yeah, Death Wish was sick. Yeah,
and you know Charles Bronson was a good guy. You know, it's funny with the Hells Angels. We have all this kind of like connections to these movie people and these bands and whatnot. You know, it was crazy
because people.
I don't know what it is.
People really look up to that. People. This is why this show is so popular. Is because most ordinary people, law-abiding citizens, are fascinated by the outlaw, the person that has the gall to stand apart from society and society's law.
Right.
But you would say, well, in a democratic society, the law has to apply to everybody equally, and the monopoly on violence has to be monopolized by the government, because then you have people getting shot in the head because they were decided to show the government where a bunch of illegal weapons are that we're going to go blow people up illegally.
Right.
And you can't have that. So that would be the argument.
Yeah,
That would be the
I
counter
understand
argument.
the argument. I'm certainly aware of the argument.
Yeah.
And
do you think the Hells Angels now are trying to clean up the brand or move the brand towards a much more legitimate image?
I think they're doing what they want. I don't think they care. I think there's a whole new group of individuals in the club. I think the club's changed direction. I'll be careful. I won't say lost direction. I'll just say they've changed direction. Maybe I'm not relating to them anymore. It was very profound when I made up my mind to leave the club.
But you're supposed to be allowed to leave the club. That's
they don't like it.
Right. Well, that's what in the charter or the rules. Right. You're supposed to be allowed to leave whenever you want, and you keep your patch.
You do not.
Oh, you got to give your patch.
You got to
back.
give all your indicia back. But let me tell you something. Like, I went to the club and told them I was quitting. And
what year was this?
This was 2011. And I said, and people said, why? And I suffered later for what I had to say that night. I left on good terms. I was in good standing. I was basically like retired.
Yeah.
They don't have an official retirement, but people go, I retired.
Yeah.
And people said, why are you leaving? And I said, because we're fighting. And I named all the clubs we were fighting. And I included law enforcement in that. I said, we're fighting wars on 5 fronts. And I said, but aside from that, I go, we have become the people we rebelled against. And I go, I don't want to be part of that.
What does that mean? Who rebelling against?
We rebelled against we had become the people we rebelled against.
But who were you? So who are those people?
Well, I think the Man and the Hells Angels were very similar at that point in time for me.
So, but you felt like you were rebelling against the system.
We rebelled against society.
Right.
Okay. We didn't have any rules. I mean, we had a morality. We did what was morally correct for that outlaw, unwritten rule standards. I know a lot of people I've gotten discussions with people, and they think that's a ludicrous statement. No, they being the Hells Angels, and I was part of it at that time, had become the people we rebelled against. I wanted to be an outlaw. I wanted to be free. Oh, wow. I wanted to walk away, and I did.
So you felt like there were too many rules.
Yeah, it was just it was too restricting. I know what morality is. I know what's right, and I know what's wrong. I don't need all these rules to tell me.
Well, what were some of those rules? Those new rules that were restricting you, or restrictive?
You just couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. You had to ask permission for this. I don't ask permission for anything.
Can you
I'm an
get a
outlaw.
little more specific?
Well, I don't know. What's that? Yeah, this is very profound. We had a guy get kicked out of the club. Good brother. He got kicked out of the club. He wasn't part of Sonny's camp. He got kind of pushed out. He made a mistake, and I'm not going to get into who it was. So I come to the meeting, and I got in an argument with another officer because I wouldn't defriend him on Facebook.
Oh, my God. That's the gayest thing I've ever heard. I thought you guys were supposed to be bikers.
Okay, there you go.
Supposed to be cranked up.
I said, are you kidding me? I said, we're supposed to be the most notorious outlaw bike club in the world, and you are talking about you didn't defriend this guy when we kicked him out of the club. And I mean, there were people that said, well, you got to defriend him, man, or you're going to be in jeopardy. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. I just thought, man, social media is that powerful. They're even dictating the Hells Angels. I don't want this getting back to what's his name. I think he's got a big enough ego as it is. The Facebook guy.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, I don't want Zuckerberg knowing.
By the way, that's such a boomer thing. Yeah. You guys are still using Facebook, and there's gossip on Facebook. It's so funny. It's like my parents.
It's crazy.
Wow.
So I mean, that was one of the things. I mean, it's a number of things, and You know,
I'm hearing that it didn't feel very rock and roll anymore.
well, no, it wasn't rock and roll anymore.
Yeah.
It.
I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm a guy that used to jump on his bike, and you know, I ride to Oakland to party and jump on my bike and come home. I certainly, you know, better living through chemistry, if you will, to get there and back. You know, yeah, whatever it may be. I never liked crank. I like coke. I you know, snorted a lot of blow during the 80s.
Right. Never sold it though.
Well, I think a couple of times I like, you know, I give somebody a gram and they, you know, they give me $100 or something.
But it wasn't organized. You weren't.
No.
But I see your point overall though. It was time to move on, and now you've kind of been like, I don't pay attention to the gossip.
Well, I'm supposed to be.
You're supposed to be out bad or something?
I'm out bad. Nobody's allowed to talk to me.
Have they defriended you on Facebook?
They totally defriended me. And I found it ironic. And you know, the day I quit the club, I have pretty big social media following. You probably do as well. And the day I quit the club, you know, I immediately lost 700 followers, you know, that were no longer allowed to follow me. And I found the whole thing kind of humorous, ludicrous, angry. I was angry about it. All those things all wrapped into one. But, you know, I'm out bad. Sonny's tried to start a rumor that I had become a government informant, you know. And, you know, my answer to the Hells Angels and to the world is, if I had become a government informant, you know, all the top dogs would probably be in prison, you know.
You know, a lot of dirt.
Yeah, and, you know, that's what the feds told me. You know, they wanted me to flip, you know.
After you left?
After I left, yeah. They indicted me.
Yeah.
Several, you know, weeks after I left. And,
over
you know,
what? Can you explain that?
Yeah, they said that I ordered a firebombing of the 2 tattoo shop competitions in town. It was arson, interfering in interstate commerce. I don't know where they came up with that.
You had the most popular tattoo shop in town for a long time.
35 years.
And then now there's new tattoo shops in town, and you're accused of basically, firebombing.
Firebombing them, yeah.
Well, were they firebombed?
They were firebombed. And, you know, my
I wonder who did that.
Well, I'm gonna talk about it.
Okay.
My defense team, like, I wanted to tell a judge, it's obvious I had nothing to do with it because they were still standing. They were firebombed unsuccessfully. Whoever did it was an amateur, and they threw the Molotov cocktail in there, and they didn't mix it right, and it flashed out.
Yeah,
the explosion put out the fire. You know, I don't know if you know that term or not.
No, but if you had done it, you would have done it. You know how to do it.
I would have made it. It would have burned to the ground.
Right.
Yeah. And you know, of course, my daughter's my lawyer. You know, she's, Jesus Christ, Dad, what's wrong with you? And I go, well, you know, but I got to tell you, they were trying to blame me for other fire bombings and whatnot. And you know, Judge Wu, man, a pretty brave guy. He said, well, let me ask you this. He said, did you ever see Mr. Christie walking down the street? Or do you have any witnesses that saw him walking down the street with a Molotov cocktail? I said, well, no, Your Honor. And he goes, well, you know, you can't just make this stuff up because it's folklore or it's myth.
Right.
You know, he goes, oh, come into my courtroom with evidence.
Right.
And ultimately, the judge said, look, he told the U.S. attorney, this isn't the case you want it to be. He goes, you want this to be your career case. He goes, this is not it. He goes, this is a weak case. It's a house of cards. And I was being kind of cavalier, sitting at the defense table. Like, I thought, gee, maybe this guy's going to give me a direct acquittal from the bench or something. No.
So you're in trial. Is this a pretrial motion, or you're actually in the trial?
We're in picking the jury, and we're getting ready to start.
Yeah.
And the jury's picked. And then he looks at me, and he goes, and you, Mr. Christie. He goes, God only knows what you've gotten away with the last 40 years. And he goes, I want you guys to go down to Judge Walter's court. I want you to come back with an agreement, a plea agreement. He goes, let's end this. He goes, this is ridiculous. And, you know, because their best witness is the witness that I just alluded to earlier. Did Mr. Christie, you know, tell you to bomb the tattoo shop? You know, and this is part of the record. No, but I knew what Mr. Christie was thinking. You know, he wanted me to firebomb the tattoo
That's
shops.
crazy.
He's reading my mind,
Right,
you know, and
sure.
the Judge Wu's too smart. Judge Wu's going,